Hi, Jersey City. This is Rolando Lavaro, Councilman-At-Large, and I'm joined today with Ward Councilman James Solomon. And this is the fifth of six interviews for the vacant Ward D Council seat and the appointment to fill that seat. We are joined here today by prospective candidate Brian Rands. Brian, say hi.
Hi, everyone.
We're going to be judicious with our time and economical. So we're going to get started. But before I do that, let me just give a little background and for everyone. We gave 10 questions in advance to all of the candidates. I'm sorry, 9 questions in advance to all the candidates. Over the course of the next 30 minutes, there may be follow-up questions as Brian answers. And then at the very end, we'll have a few questions that's personalized just for Brian that he wasn't aware of coming into the meeting. So, and then lastly, Brian will make a closing statement to share with everybody. So Councilman Solomon's going to get us kicked off, and I'll turn it over to him.
All right. Thank you, Rolando, and thank you, Brian, for being here. So the first question has a couple parts, and I'll do them one by one. So the first part simply, why are you interested in the position of Ward E councilperson?
So that's a really important question, because I think when you want to go into office, it's the most important thing is to have good principles in mind and a good motivation to do so. I've lived in the Jersey City Heights since 2014. I started off as a law clerk to a judge at the Superior Court on Newark Avenue. And thereafter, I got involved with the Riverview Neighborhood Association, and I created a nonpartisan initiative to expand civic engagement in the Heights called Heights Votes. And one of the reasons why I got involved is I'm very passionate about civic engagement and community involvement. I think to make a community better, you need as much people involved in the process as possible. And specifically to this position, I think the Heights, very similar to a lot of other areas in Jersey City, is going through a very interesting transition. You're seeing a lot of progress, but you're also seeing the pains of that progress. A lot of displacement, a lot of income insecurity, a lot of things that come with an evolving municipality like Jersey City. So with my experience as an attorney and my civic engagement experience in the community, I think I'm very uniquely capable of advocating for some of the most vulnerable people in our community, people who are having a difficult time staying in their homes, paying the bills. And I want to see Jersey City expand the progress to more people. So I'd say my slogan is fighting for a more just and equitable Heights. And I think that's something that I can really bring to the table, especially now in the COVID-19 public health crisis.
Great, thank you, Brian. So the second question, which you touched upon a little bit and then answered, was please describe what education, training, or experience you have that is relevant and makes you qualified to serve as the Ward E councilperson. And then specifically, do you have any training in public administration, urban planning, or municipal finance?
So, I'm not from New Jersey originally. I'm originally from Indiana, go Hoosiers, but I love New Jersey. It's my home. I got my undergraduate degree at Indiana University in journalism, and I fell in love with my political science and economics courses. So I transitioned from journalism to pursuing a career in law. So after I graduated, I went to law school at Penn State Dickinson School of Law in State College, Pennsylvania. And thereafter, I applied for a lot of clerkships, and one of the judges I applied to was one of the judges here in Hudson County. And after 2 rounds of interviews, I acquired a judicial clerkship with the Honorable Barry P. Sarkeesian, who's now retired. And in that role, I saw multiple trials, multiple motions involving many things that City Council sees. So civil rights litigation, discrimination litigation, issues with development and zoning, specifically the zoning board or the planning board granting variances, challenging municipal ordinances. So that gave me a lot of public law experience. And after I clerked, I started working for Legal Services. It's a nonprofit that's funded by the state, the federal government, and the county to provide legal services to low-income residents in Bergen, Passaic, and Hudson counties. We have multiple areas of practice. My first area of practice was housing, so preventing foreclosures, whether it's via a mortgage or tax lien or utility lien, or landlord-tenant evictions. And then I've transitioned to public benefits and education. So that's representing people who've been denied benefits like Social Security, TANF, EA, and also representing families with kids with disabilities who are seeking different or better placements for their children. And just from my experiences in that area, I think I can really provide a lot of context to the city council because, as you know, we live in a democratic republic. Laws govern our actions and the actions of our constituents. So I think I can do a very good job at crafting legislation, pinpointing issues that impact people who are disproportionately impacted by increased development in our community. And I think I could be a good evaluator of settlements that our law department enters into. And then also just from my experience with the RNA, we are a check on excessive development. You know, we want to ensure there's safe development, there's green development, and we want to make sure there's affordable housing so, you know, all citizens can share in the progress that we're achieving. And those are things that I've been advocating for since I've been involved with the community here in the Heights.
Great, thank you. And then the last question is, as of now, are you planning on running in the November election?
I would say I'm 99% sure I'm going to be running. You know, there's no guarantees. You know, it really depends on what's going on with my job. But as of right now, I do plan on running for a re-election in November.
Great, thank you. I think Rolando's unmuting himself.
Apologies for that. If you give me 1 second, I'm kind of lost my way here.
Well, while we wait for Rolando, Brian, are you Indiana or Butler? Do you have a college basketball team?
So both my parents and my grandpa and my grandma went to Indiana. So I'm very partial towards IU.
Sure.
But I also live pretty close to the Butler campus, and every summer I went to Butler's basketball camp. So when they're not playing IU, I do cheer for Butler.
Okay, that sounds, you got both of them. I like.
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies. So, Brian, as you know, Councilman Yun was known for his analytical questions and his willingness to take on the politically powerful. How specifically will you follow that example? And how would you approach the role of councilman differently than Councilman Yun?
Well, you know, I want to give some context to my knowledge of his service. Obviously, I knew him as my city council person. I saw him in community meetings. I saw him through his social media platforms, at caucus meetings, at city council. I've not seen how he interacted with his colleagues, so I can't comment how he you know, acted within his colleagues. And a lot of you have been very complimentary of him, but also saying sometimes there are disagreements with policy. And at the end of the day, you know, just from my professional upbringing and my civic engagement work, advocacy usually involves checking or challenging power. So I think you have to approach it as knowing your principles, but also showing someone you're dealing with respect and kind of understanding where they are. I don't consider myself someone who needs change to occur automatically. So I do see the benefit to sometimes incremental change. And if that requires meeting with a coalition of council people to say, okay, this is what we want to do. This is what you want to do. How can we make this work so we can move this forward? So I think what I plan to do, you know, when nominated as city council person for Ward D, would really just show respect, tell people my principles, be who I am, and hopefully through collaboration and through understanding where people are, we can achieve great progress, not only for the Heights, but for the city at large.
Great, thank you. And Brian, is there anything, for just as a follow-up, and you were, it's a good context that you wouldn't have seen every part of the way, Councilman, you approach a job, but anything that you see that you would do differently than, as you saw him conducting the role?
One thing, I mean, this is just from my perspective.
Sure.
Michael was very passionate in what he believed in. And that's a very admirable characteristic. But when I think some of his constituents were talking about some of their issues, sometimes I thought he wasn't really seeing their side of the issue. And he might not have been someone who could work well with colleagues in terms of accomplishing what they wanted to accomplish. So I think I might be a little bit more collaborative. I think he was a little aggressive sometimes on social media, which I know sometimes you need to do when you want to accomplish things. That's standing up to power. But also I know sometimes you just don't want to bark up the wrong tree, and sometimes you can accomplish an objective in a better way. So I think I'll do my best to listen to all sides and say where I am and try to find common ground to achieve progress for the most amount of people. Great,
thank you. So the next question is what are the most difficult challenges facing the Heights?
Growing pains. First of all, as you saw with the water main break, we're a very dense community with infrastructure that was built a long time ago. There's a lot of development, and what development brings is a lot of cultural change, different experiences, different histories. I'm a firm believer that cities have to evolve, and that requires new people coming in, some people leaving. But I also understand that if you don't have a check on unregulated development, you're going to create a community that you really don't envision you want to see. It's primarily going to be luxury housing, condominiums, primarily educated, primarily white or Asian communities. One of the coolest things about the Heights is its overall diversity, just like the city at large, whether it's socioeconomic status, religion, employment, political beliefs. And I think the best way to ensure that that diversity is preserved is by ensuring that everyone has access to some of the fruits. So, I know there's competing inclusionary zoning ordinances. I've been to a few of the committee meetings. That's something I'm a staunch advocate for. I'm definitely for amending rent control to incorporate more units. Right now, I think it exempts 4 units or lower. I definitely don't think if someone lives in the building and is using tenant income to pay the mortgage, I don't think that they should be under rent control. But, if it's a 4 or 3 family and it's just an investment property from someone from Manhattan or Connecticut, I do think there should be some sort of compromise on rent control regarding those types of properties. And then another big issue is the ratables on our water. And I think you guys had talked about this in city council. We're under a state and federal mandate to reform our combined sewer system. And that's going to be primarily financed through what we pay for water. And that's going to be an indirect tax increase on thousands of people. So incorporating as much green technology as possible, like in Philadelphia, to kind of eliminate the need for gray infrastructure, I think could really not only be ecologically friendly, but also do a good job to get under the federal and state mandate. And then zoning. I really think we need to amend our zoning in the Heights. Currently, it's incentivizing the demolition of buildings, which a lot of them are affordable. So, I want to make sure that we can provide some flexibility in the zoning to preserve some of the housing that we have, which I think will impact tenants' rents as well.
Sorry about that. So as a follow-up to that, what would be your top 3 legislative priorities right out of the gate?
Definitely housing affordability and zoning changes. I think the most simple thing you can do, and this goes to parking as well, is eliminate the automatic curb cut in the R1. That not only incentivizes demolition by creating parking garage, little parking spots, but that eliminates parking on the street. And then it privatizes parking because a lot of times the owners of these buildings don't live there. So then they just rent out the garage, which increases the cost of parking. So, zoning, to disincentivize demolitions and to increase affordability. I would say my second most important legislative priority would be, small business incubation. We're in a really cool area. There's a lot of colleges around here. We have a lot of schools. I really liked what actually the administration did during the Bloomberg grant when they did small business loans. I think that'd be really cool because you can not only provide sources of revenue for people to start small businesses on your main streets, but then you can bring in kids from the schools to serve as interns. And then, with the zoning, you can create artist live workspaces. So light manufacturing with residential, that's really helped the Heights, especially on New York Avenue. And it's really incubated a lot of small business owners. So I think finding unique ways to empower our small businesses would be something that I really would want to advocate for.
Great, thank you, Brian. So you touched upon parts of this in your prior answers, but what action would you take as a council person to address parking issues in the Heights and in Jersey City?
So as I said, first I would definitely eliminate the automatic curb cut. First of all, a lot of those parking spots, they're being converted into illegal apartments. And our housing enforcement officers can only do so much. So that could eliminate that incentive. You would put back the curb cut, which creates more parking on the street. And then also during commercial corridors, I know some people disagree with this, but I also think a parking garage could be helpful. I know in the Heights, there's a redevelopment plan to create a parking deck, which is, I think, by the Burger King on Central Avenue. I don't think that's the best place location for it. I think if you look at Main Street commercial advocates, it's best to put it at the beginning or the end to incentivize people to walk up and down the commercial corridor. I'm also not a fan of using the redevelopment plan to do it. I know it allows a private sector company to do it, but also that could create precedent that creates a lot of density in a mid to small density or height district. So I think something maybe like bonding actually for a parking garage, I think would be the best interest in the Heights, and place it either near the end of Central Avenue or near the front, kind of by Stop and Shop, because that could provide more parking for people who need to grocery shop. And then I think we've done a good job, at least moving forward. I know Mo Kimberg helped push, and then Michael Yoon also, I think he sponsored the ordinance to do zone parking. I am a supporter of zone parking. I know people complain about how it's administered. You don't have enough guest passes. So it would be nice if we could create a more streamlined system to accomplish that. And I'll be willing to work with, the administration and then you all to help accomplish that.
Great, thank you.
Brian, you mentioned that inclusionary zoning was one of your priorities in that sense. Can you tell us, expand a little bit on your position on inclusionary zoning, and let us know if you think there should be any changes made to our current rent control legislation?
Yeah, I already briefly mentioned that. I know there's two competing ordinances right now. I tend to, and we've talked about this, I tend to support your ordinance, Councilman Lavaro. I think it incorporates more housing, which I think is very important, since Jersey City in general has a lot of R1 housing, which is 1 and 2 family, 3 stories. Most projects will not be covered by that inclusionary zoning ordinance, since the mayor's ordinance exempts 30 or lower. However, I also know that each ward's a little different. Some parts of Ward D, Ward E, Ward F, and Ward B are different than some parts in Ward A, Ward B, Ward C. So I think in that instance, I would have to talk with all of my colleagues and really try to come up with some sort of solution to alleviate some of those concerns. You don't want an unenforceable ordinance, but you also want to understand that development is inconsistent based upon geography, based upon infrastructure, public transportation. I definitely support, your ordinance that's currently on the council agenda. The next question is, how will you, collaborate with your colleagues to create a policy that we all can agree on? And then rent control. I think the CPI equation is actually very good in Jersey City. And then I think your report, Councilman Solomon, brought up some really important things. People don't know they live in rent-controlled properties. Every lease has to say this is a rent-controlled property. That has to be enforced. People need to fill out their rental statements to show what the rent is. If not, they should be sending municipal complaints to them for them to appear in court. To change the ordinance, I would incorporate more real estate. I think maybe 4 non-owner occupied homes could be a good start.
Yeah. Let me just ask a quick follow-up on that. Oftentimes the pushback on the idea of including non-owner occupied 1 to 4 families is that, these are investments that have been made oftentimes maybe by big companies, but sometimes by, someone just buying a second home and using it as income to support themselves, and that rent control would harm them and would lower potentially the value of their property and would get less in property taxes. And so how would you sort of respond to people who provide those types of critiques of the expansion of rent control?
I think there's competing goals with a lot of things. I think when you look at Jersey City and then look at our neighbors, whether it's Brooklyn, whether it's Queens, whether it's Manhattan, there is a very valuable thing to eliminating displacement. Displacement is it's hard to economically quantify the value of avoiding displacement. But if you read the book Evicted by a professor at Princeton, just to see the impact of someone who's been evicted and how it could just destroy their lives, because they might need to use all their savings to get into an apartment, but that apartment's illegal, and then they're evicted, and then they're homeless, and then they lose their job because they're starting to smell at work. I really think that eliminating displacement and providing some level of continuity in people's lives is a really important issue. And I think, limiting that investment of theirs, even though it might hurt them in the long run, I think it's necessary for a community like ours.
Thank you, Brian. So I believe I have the next question, which is getting into our school board issues. So two-parter. The first is, what's your position on the upcoming referendum regarding the school board governance between mayoral control and elected school board? And then in the position of the school board, how would you address the current school budget crisis?
So those are very, very interesting questions and very important. As for the referendum, I actually went to city council when you were voting on that. And I did say I was against putting that question on the ballot. I prefer to keep it as it is. The reason why, primarily, not even looking at education policy, just the theoretical question of asking people to vote away their voting rights. I just think that is not a good practice. I think we should be looking to expand voting rights. And I think people want to have a say in their schools. And you may complain that there's a lot of special interests involved in Board of Education races, and it's true. You have the developers.
Sorry about that.
Have the teachers union. But I don't think interests who spend a lot of money is a good reason to eliminate someone's right to vote. So depending on how the question's phrased, I haven't seen the language, but I would prefer to keep it as it is as an elected position.
Great. And thoughts on the budget?
So the budget, that's a very tough issue. I know the Board of Ed already increased the school levy for schools, and that's somewhat out of City Council's control. I am a firm supporter of fully funding our schools. first of all, I don't think the state should have cut our aid in the first place. Although we are increasing our ratables and we have some very prosperous areas, we also have a lot of people who are receiving free or subsidized lunches, English as a second language. I think it's a very cruel with what the state did to cut our aid. So, I understand that we need to pay our fair share, and I think the Board of Education started moving that way. But I think we can't stop the fight to advocate the state to provide more money for us. If you go into our schools, a lot of them are crumbling. The infrastructure is old. We're running out of space, and it's just not good for our children. So we have to find creative ways to fully fund our schools. I know you guys were looking to find efficiencies within the municipal budget and transfer that money to the Board of Education. I'm not fully apprised of all the details, whether it be stipulations on that money, but I definitely would consider that. I also think shared service agreements. Obviously, you can definitely incorporate apprenticeship programs with small businesses and private sector companies, with local government. You can utilize the Department of Recreation to create more opportunities. So I think those are all ideas I would explore.
Thank you.
Sorry. So the next two questions have to do with COVID, COVID pandemic, and what can the city do to help residents and small businesses survive and recover from the economic fallout from the COVID-19 crisis?
So that's another very difficult question. And I don't want to say I don't envy you. I'd love to work with you to help solve it, but it's a very tough question. We have to maintain a budget, and our tax receipts are decreasing. So it's going to be very difficult to pass a budget that will not only provide for essential services in Jersey City, like fire, police, infrastructure, health and human services, but also support the residents, which is, one of my biggest passions in life. One thing I think we could do is, definitely organize some sort of, and this might have already been done, but there needs to be some sort of centralized location that puts like who's still operating, and then that can connect people who are looking to support local business with businesses that are open. I understand that there's been a COVID-19 relief fund, which is going to be used for a lot of different things. I understand why it's being done. We can't use a lot of public money to do it. But I think Councilman Solomon, you made some good points that we have to make sure that, immigration status shouldn't go into who receives it. And also I am worried about, not saying that it is happening, but it's important to know who's donating to the fund. It might be difficult because it's a 501c3. They might not have to share all their donors, but I think that's very important. So, another thing is public procurement. I know, I'm a Keynesian at heart. I believe the government can help stimulate demand and provide income for people locally who then support it. So, utilizing your procurement to support local businesses as much as possible. Moving your money to local banks who lend locally. I think that's a really important idea. It might have already been done. But just utilizing the money you have to support as much local business as possible.
Great. And then I'll do the last one, and I think we're running a little short in time. So again, it's a huge one, but we'll address it quickly to get you a closing question. So how would you prioritize the city's budget given the shortfalls from COVID-19? What are areas to you that you would be untouchable, and where would you look for efficiencies and places to potentially cut?
So, that's a really hard question for me to answer without actually seeing the budget and the books. I don't know what audits have been done of the executive branch to see where money's being used. Like, for example, the Board of Ed, they had that audit that recommended, okay, you can cut a certain amount of positions and still maintain the product. So I think you definitely need to have a professional to look over the budget, to really understand, and also the macro impacts of the budget. How is the multiplier being used? What money is going into the private sector, who then hires people? That's all very important. Parks is really important. That provides an outlet for a lot of people. It's where people come together during tough times. Fire and safety are really important, especially if you want to pursue community policing, because you need, boots on the ground to help preserve community policing. But also, labor is one of the most expensive inputs for any municipal government or any corporation. So I understand the first thing people are going to want to do is lay off workers. So you have to be very careful in where you prioritize. And I really think some sort of independent audit could really help in determining what would be the best place to approach it.
Great, thank you.
Brian, we're at the end of our time here, so just going to ask if you can make a closing statement and to the people of Jersey City.
Okay. Well, thank you, Councilman Lavaro and Councilman Solomon, for the opportunity to, explain why I believe I would be the best option for an appointment to fill Councilman Yoon's seat. I believe that with my background experience, with my legal work representing some of people in our neighborhood and Hudson County to ensure that they don't lose their homes, to obtain benefits, to get better placements for their children, through me working for the courts, I think I have a lot of legal experience that could be greatly used on the city council to move our city forward in a just and equitable way. I also think that my heart is with community advocacy and organizing. I want to be a person of the people. I want to hear your concerns, and I believe I'd be very transparent. And I'm also a huge believer in democracy. I understand there is an election coming up in November, and if I am chosen for this position and I lose in November, I would honor your wishes, because that's the beauty of a democratic republic. We gain our power from the consent of the government, or our government does. I would really like the opportunity, but if you don't think that I'm the right person for you, I encourage you to vote for someone else. The most important thing to do is vote. But please vote for me, or tell your council people to support me. I want to fight for a more just and equitable heights.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. We appreciate the time and appreciate you, putting yourself out there.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for your time.
Thanks. Stay safe.
You as well.
Thanks.